Hi everybody, it's Crazy. It's Friday, and it's time for the UPBGE video of the week. Now, we're up to episode number 10, and before I get started, gotta give a shout out to my buddy Day, who has been working on the Game 3 engine non-stop. He's been coming up with some awesome stuff for Game 3. If you'd like to learn more about Game 3, would like to get the demo to the game, you're gonna have to jump on over to the server and give Day a shout and ask him if you can get it. I'm pretty sure he'd be more than happy to give you the link to the GitHub page. I want to let him be the chooser of that because that's all up to him because this is his baby. If he says yay, he tells me on the server, yeah, go ahead, Crazy, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and put it in the link in the description, and it'll be an edit, okay, because it won't be right now because I'm actually recording. Okay, so where are we at? We are at this book right here called the Game Development with Blender, which is the Game Engine book that we've been reading from since episode number 1. And we're getting close to the end of chapter 1, so let's go ahead and get started. We left off with data blocks, and I'm going to go ahead and read it to you, and we're going to switch over. Let me get my mouse back here. Okay, we're going to switch over to Blender and the UPBGE interface. Okay, so if you've got UPBGE already open, hopefully you've remembered to put it on Blender Game. Some people forget, self-included. Make sure you put it on Blender Game. If you want this to happen every time and you don't feel like having to do all that, going up there and clicking Blender Game, come over here and hit Save Startup File in the File menu. Just scroll on down and hit that. I don't because I use Blender Render sometimes to do different things, and also sometimes I use the Cycles engine. But for game purposes, we need to be in Blender Game. Okay? So I'm putting that over here, and I'll be reading from the book, and we're going to do some demonstrations on the Blender and on UPBGE, so you can see that it actually still works, even though they're talking about 2.5. This is 0.2 UPBGE, which is based off of 2.78. Okay, 0.5. All right, so it's a way later version, but they did kind of update it a little bit. So let's get going. Often a single Blender file contains hundreds of objects, each with different colors, textures, and animations. How is this organized? Blender uses data blocks to represent content stored within a Blender file. Each data block represents a collection of data or settings. Some common data block types you will encounter are object data blocks, mesh data blocks, material data blocks, texture data blocks, and image data blocks. Okay, in order to reduce the apparent complexity of the program, Blender further organizes data blocks into hierarchies. Now I'm going to come over here and pull down so you can see the hierarchy. Okay, and I'm going to read it off here. Okay, at the top level are scenes. That's this little guy right here. Okay, which can have a number of worlds, each of which can have any number of objects. Objects can be a mesh, a lamp, a camera, and so on. If the object is a mesh, which this cube is, then a mesh data block is attached to it. As you see, there goes a mesh data block. You notice that it switches over to edit mode. Okay, if I hit tab, it'll go back over. But when you click on it, it will do that. Okay. If the object is a lamp, okay, we'll go over here to lamp. Okay, then a lamp data block is attached to the object. Okay, so a lamp has a lamp object, a camera has a camera object, and a cube, okay, or a mesh has a mesh object. Okay, now furthermore, that mesh object also has a material object and also has a texture object. And if you attach an image to that texture, it also shows that image data block. Okay, so all these data blocks go in hierarchy. It goes all the way down to the picture. Okay, all right. Throughout the Blender interface, you will run into many data block managers. They all, that's this little guy right here. We're going to go to this. Let's pull it back up because we don't really need that. You got this right here. Let's see, where are you at? Right there. This is a data block manager. Okay, this is also a type of data block manager. It is the object or the mesh manager. Then you've got the mesh object manager. Okay, which does all kinds of cool stuff. Because data blocks can be shared, copied, and reused, large scenes can be managed efficiently through the use of shared data blocks. Okay, so let's hit Control or Shift D and Y. Oh, notice something I didn't do. Let's go ahead and turn on my screencast keys. I apologize for that. That's this little guy down here in the corner, which shows you what I type and what key, okay, what key I press. Okay. Cursor to center. Okay, so as you see, whatever key I press, it does that key. Okay, even on the center one. Okay. All right, so we make a copy of that and we'll hit Shift D, and we're going to make one more, and we're going to put it here. Okay, so now these three. Okay, there's three different ones on the hierarchy here. Okay, as you see, there's cube 1, cube 0, 1, and cube 0, 2. Okay, so 0, 1, and 2. Okay, which is 3 cubes. But you notice that if I switch to each one, besides hitting the mouse, okay, the mesh data block here is saying that this is 0.01. So it has a completely different one than this one and this one. But what about if we wanted to make them the same? Okay, so we come over to this one, and we're going to go over here to where it has cube. Okay, because that's this data block. Okay, it's cube. So now if you notice, there's 2. That's this one and this one. But say I want to add this one too. Very simple. Come over here, click on it. Now you've got 3. All 3 of these are now have the same data block. So they're gonna share the same material. They're gonna share the same texture and same image file if you have that. Even though it looks like they have separate ones. Okay, they're using the same one. They're using cube. See, cube, cube. There is no cube 01. There is no cube 02. Now there's a way to actually link objects, and we'll go on to that later. I'm still learning about that one myself. That's a fun one. Okay, so let's continue on. Parenting and grouping. Grouping and parenting both allow you to introduce some form of order to the scene by setting up arbitrary relationships between different objects. But grouping and parenting work in different ways. Okay, so let's go with parenting first. Parenting is used to establish links between multiple objects, so the basic transformations like location, rotation, and scaling are propagated from the parent to its children. This way, any transformation applied to the parent is automatically applied to all of the children. Parenting is a useful way to glue different objects together so they behave as one. So right now, if you grab this one, none of them move, right? Same thing with this one, same thing with this one, right? Parenting will make it do basically kind of like this, okay? Or you can move all 3, all right, without having to select them all. Okay, so to parent one object to another, simply select the object you want to be the child first. Okay, if more than one object is to be a child, select all of them now. So we'll select that one to be a child as well. Okay. Lastly, select the object that you want to be the parent. Okay, so that would be this one. All holding the shift key. Make sure you're holding the shift key when you do this. Okay, because you want them all to do it at the same time. It's a little bit, back to the basics. Okay, then press Control P. Okay, now there's different things you can use, but for the most part, we're going to do object. You can keep transformation if you have them at different sizes, so you don't lose that size difference. But for right now, we're just going to do straight object. So now that they're all parented, if I hit grab, all of them do the same. Okay, if I scale, they all do the same. If I hit rotate, they all do the same. Okay, an object can only have one parent object, but a parent object can have many children. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and hit Control Z. Okay, now what it means is that you can have more than one child to a parent, but you can also have, okay, if I do it this way, oops, hit Control instead of Shift. Sorry about that. Okay, now you notice this cube is a child. Okay, and it is the child of this one. Okay, which is also a child. Both of them are childs of this one. Notice the difference. So I can have this one rotating. Okay, I can have this one scaling, and it's scaling both of them. And then I can have this one moving on, say, the y-axis. So, this way you can have these controlling certain things. So there's a lot of things you can do with parenting that are really awesome. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so let's go on to grouping. Okay, grouping can also be used to logically link objects in the scene together without any transformations constraints to the object. So say you don't want these, to be constrained to doing movement or anything else. Okay, so you want these to be free flowing. This does this does this, and this does this. Okay, so you don't want to change any of that, and you don't want to lock them into that. Okay. Unlike parenting, grouping does not have a parent-child relationships. Objects are simply members of a group. Okay? Alright, so to do this, you select all the objects you want to group. So let's say we're going to group these three right here together. Okay? Press Control G to add them to the new group. So you hit Control and G. Okay? Now they are all part of a group. They still move independently. They're not going to be grouped, but they are grouped together. If you notice that little green, and if you come over here, which is, I'm going to read off about that. Let's see. You may also manage group memberships from the Object Properties editor. That's the Object Properties, and you can do it from the editor, which is all the way down here. And you can add a new group, or you can change the group name, or you can do other stuff with the group. Okay? Grouping by itself isn't very useful, but groups can be quickly instanced as group instances. Group instance is a very useful way to create multiple copies of objects without making actual copies of the objects. Grouping will also come in handy for asset management, which will be discussed in the next chapter, coming soon. Okay, so you can group, all these together, and you can also create a new group. Okay, and hit Control G, and now these are another group. Okay, so that's a group, and that's a group. Okay. There's a lot of things you can do with group and instancing. We'll go on into that later, but there's pretty neat stuff you can do with that. Okay, a single object can be in multiple groups. A group can have multiple objects. That's what I just did. Okay, this group can have multiple objects, and not just the same object, but it can have multiple objects. Okay, and you can have multiple groups. You can have them in different groups. I can go to this one and it's named group 01, but this one, okay, is group. So this group can be instanced, and along with this one, which will drag all three of these in there. All kinds of cool shit. I'm sorry. I'll strike down later. All right, so backwards compatibility. So with that being said, older versions of Blender and UPBGE and the Blender game engine actually can be backwards compatible. Okay? In other words, Blender is designed so that older files can be opened with newer versions of Blender. But due to the rate that Blender matures, some unexpected behaviors are expected when you least expect them. So things can change, and some of your physics will mess up and stuff like that. You can actually go to append and bring it all over, and hopefully you can reconnect. Okay, but see, due to the Blender API or Python API change in Blender 2.5, old scripts written in 2.4x will be broken in later versions of Blender. Same thing as it went from 2.5 to 2.6, 2.6 to 2.7, 2.7 to 2.8 and 2.8 to 2.9, 2.9 to 3.0. Okay, all these will have that same problem, and you're going to have to find ways around it and rework stuff. It happens. It's still also better than having to import everything over to a completely different engine. Okay, but by the time you're reading this, there should be enough new content available to find. Okay, so there were many videos that came out years ago, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7 even, that will not work in UPBGE. They'll crash. You cannot use UPBGE in the regular BGE because UPBGE is the newer version. Okay, so it's newer than what is actually there, and it will crash. Okay, what we're going to do onward. Okay, so let me pop out of this and say, okay, this concludes the crash course on Blender and the game engine. By now, you should have a cursory understanding of the function of a game engine and be familiar with the Blender interface. In the next chapter, you will get your hands dirty and build a simple game by following the step-by-step tutorial. What? You're going to make a game. It's going to be a tutorial, but you're going to make your first game, get your hands a little dirty, figuring it out, getting there and understanding what's going on. So stay tuned next week as we go into Chapter 2, building your first game. Until then, see you next week.